There's a fascinating line in the Vienna game called the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. Knight takes e4. It leads to some crazy, complicated, wild, absolutely ridiculous positions if you want to, but there's also a safe line that you can play. It kind of avoids some of those complications. I'm going to show you both of those lines, although personally, I like the crazy ones. I think it's really interesting. Both sides have chances, whether you're playing it as white, whether you're playing it as black. And there's not a lot of good videos that talk about this opening. So we're going to dive into what exactly is going on with the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. All right, so first of all, we have the Vienna game, knight to c3, followed by bishop to c4. Now, when white does this, they are allowing us as black to capture on e4. And when we do this, at first glance, it looks like, wait a minute, aren't we just losing our knight for a pawn? Well, actually, no, we're not, because notice the position of white's pieces. We can follow it up with d5, forking these guys, and we're going to get a piece back regardless of what white does, right? White can't move both pieces at the same time. If you throw in a check, it doesn't really help because, again, we keep the double attack on the pieces. If you take it, we simply take back. If you move back here, we simply take this. However you look at it, we're going to get our piece back. Now, the other thing that white could do, and sometimes people will play at the lower levels a lot, is they'll sacrifice the bishop here, and then they'll take your knight, and they think, okay, I made you not be able to castle, and I've exposed your king. This has got to be good for me, right? Actually, it's not, and the reason is because black's going to play d5, and now black is the one who has total control over the center. Now, it is tricky, and I'll just to give you an example of that, I'll show you a very nasty trap here. Queen to f3 check. You have to run back and hide. And now white can play the move d4. And if you're not paying attention, and if you capture this knight, you will lose the game. Why do I say that? What do you think white's going to do if we take this knight? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is actually queen to b3 check, and we're getting checkmated. We have no way to stop the checkmate except by sacrificing a couple of pieces, and then it's over, all right? So you do have to watch out, but if you play correctly, it's actually better for black. And if you're wondering what's the best move in this position, you don't take this. You just simply deal with the threat here. You play knight to c6. And then white might play here, threatening checkmate. You simply play queen to d7, defending. And now you're good. You've got the center. You're going to bring this guy out at some point. You're going to bring this guy out. You're going to bring your rook over, kick the knight away, and you're going to be doing fine. It is tricky, but just know it's good for black, okay? Now, at the top levels, like master level, when somebody plays this opening, they will always respond, they will always respond to knight takes e4 with one move. Queen to h5. And this is where the very interesting things happen in the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. Now, I think a lot of lower-rated players don't know about this idea, and that's why you don't see it very often. Most people are taking the knight, or they're taking here, and you just don't see this move too much. But this is where it starts to get really interesting. And if you notice carefully, white is threatening checkmate on f7. So the best thing for black to do is to go back. And by the way, if you try to like defend this with your queen, let's just say, well, now your knight is a goner, and you don't have the follow-up fork because you needed your queen to support that pawn. You can't go here anymore. White just takes it. You're totally losing, right? So you have to be careful, and that's why you have to play knight to d6, defending the checkmate. Now, at this point, white has two main moves. They can capture this, which usually leads to a pretty equal position. You're going to play queen e7. There's probably going to be a queen trade, and the game goes on. You can see it's super equal. Everybody has, 3 pawns over here, 4 pawns over here. The knights and bishops are pretty equal, and both players are going to castle. It's an even game. But what a lot of people will do instead of taking that is they'll just drop the bishop back. And this is where it really starts to get interesting. Actually, let me say this. There's two moves here that black has. You can play bishop to e7, or you can play knight to c6. Now, what's the difference between these two moves? One of them goes into these wild, crazy lines, which I'm going to recommend, and that's what I've always played. And one of them says, no thanks, I'm just going to play a calm game. I'm not going to go for these crazy, complications and wild stuff. We're going to come back to the calm move, which is bishop to e7 in just a minute. So first I want to show you, the crazy complications with knight to c6, and then we'll come back and talk about bishop to e7. If you want to avoid that, this is what you would play. And we'll see why that's the case in just a minute. But first, let's take a look at knight to c6. Now, this is going to probably blow your mind when I say this, but knight to c6 actually is giving up this rook in the corner. You're allowing a forced line, I should say, where white is going to win your rook in the corner. And you might be saying, what? Like, how is that even possible? All we're doing is developing our knight and defending a pawn. How are we giving up our rook for free? Well, let me show you why. White's going to play the move knight to b5, attacking your knight. And this is super dangerous because you remember what this knight was doing. This knight was defending on f7, stopping checkmate. So if you forget about that and you take this knight, the game is over. That's like a scholar's mate, a little bit later in the game. So you can't do that. And you also, if you make a mistake of like, oops, sorry, a5. Like let's say you play a random move trying to attack the knight. They're just going to take you a check and then the same thing. You lose. So it's super dangerous. And because of that, you basically have to deal with this threat. And so what you need to play is g6, chasing the queen away. But then white comes back here and attacks again. Same thing. So what do we do now? f5. We keep blocking it off. But now queen to d5 happens. And again, there's the checkmate threat. And also the knight is about to be captured, which is the only thing defending it. So what do you have to do? You have to move your queen either to e7 or to f6. Those are the only two good moves. And notice when that happens, look at this pawn. We are giving up this fork, and now we're losing our rook. And so now you can see going all the way back here, well, when I said if we wanted to play knight to c6, we had to be willing to give up that rook. Okay, so let's keep going. Not bishop b7, we're going to come back to that. So let's keep going. Knight to b5, g6, queen here, f5, queen here. Queen to e7 and queen to f6 are both good playable moves. Which one is better? I don't know. I think most masters tend to play queen to e7 more often. That's what I've personally played. Supposedly it's maybe slightly better, but really these are both realistically playable. The point is you need to defend the checkmate, right? Because you couldn't lose your knight at any moment. So let's just say queen to e7. And now white can come in for the fork. We're going to move our king over, and they're going to take our rook. Now, you might be saying, Nelson, why did we just give up our rook? Why would I want to play this? Well, let's talk about what we have going for us as black. Look at our center, first of all. We have total control over the center with these two pawns. White has really nothing. Look at these knights. These knights are very dangerous, also controlling a lot of central squares and creating a lot of potential threats. And we're going to actually get this knight back. The knight is trapped, so we're not entirely losing a whole rook. We're losing a rook for a knight, which isn't so bad. We're going to play b6, bishop b7. We're going to have this really nice diagonal and threat on the queen. We could bring this bishop out, and we have these pawns ready to go. It's a scary position for both sides, okay, for both sides. So, and I'm actually going to show you a top-level game with this line at the end of the video, and you'll see how it plays out with two 2500s are playing it in an over-the-board game. But just know that there's trade-offs, right? Like, yes, you lost a rook. And yes, if white is able to, like, just trade everything and go into an endgame and keep their exchange up, they're going to win. But how many people can actually do that? Well, I don't know. So this is why it's so interesting. So, for example, b6 is what we would play, getting ready to put our bishop here. Most people play d3. Bishop to b7. We're attacking the knight. Now, when we attack this knight, white has two ways to approach the position. Number one is they just sacrifice it for a pawn. They say, I'm going to lose it anyway. I may as well get a pawn. And we take it back. The other way is white says, you know what? Since I'm going to lose my knight anyway, I don't really care about that pawn so much. I want to focus on getting my pieces out as quickly as possible. And they make some other move. For example, h4. This is actually threatening to win our queen. So what I recommend here is f4 just to shut that down, and then white can continue. I think the best thing for white to do, and a lot of people probably won't know this unless they've studied this, is actually to retreat the queen. And the reason is, let's just say they play a random move like knight to f3, which looks pretty good. Watch what we can do here. Knight to d4. And I want you to look carefully at white's queen. Where can it move to? Well, if you looked at that carefully, you'll find there's no good moves for the queen. It's trapped. If you take this, there's a check, and then it's undefended, so you lose it that way. So white's queen is trapped. So this just kind of gives you an idea of the dangers for white if they're not careful, and that's why queen f3 is the best move. You have to get the queen out of there before it gets trapped. This is a major threat, knight to d4. So usually they'll go back, and then we could take this, or we could keep developing. I don't know, like bishop g7 maybe, and the game's going to go on, but it's still tricky, and we still have this discovered, attack that we can do at any moment. And it's pretty wild. So that's kind of the main line of the Frankenstein-Dracula variation, where both players say, hey, let's bring on the complications. I'm not scared. Let's do it, right? Now, remember I said if you're playing as black, you could avoid that if you wanted. If you, for whatever reason, don't like that, let's go back to this position. Instead of knight to c6, remember I said there was another move you could play, bishop to e7. And now, if white tries to do the same thing, knight to b5, what can we play? Well, we can just castle. because we've got the bishop out of the way. We can castle. There's no more checkmate threat. And if white takes us here, we can just simply capture back and we're fine. Game goes on, but we're pretty happy with this. We're up a pawn, right? So that's kind of the calm, move. And then I think white will probably just take, and then I guess you castle. I don't really know this line. I'm not familiar with this one because I didn't really play this one. So it looks like something like this. The game goes on. Pretty equal, slight advantage for black, but not too much, and it's an equal game. So it's totally up to you which of those variations you like. Like I said, personally, going, where am I at? Going back to this line, personally, I like those complications. So whenever I get a chance, I'm going to play knight c6 and see what happens. It's going to be a fun game, regardless of if I win or lose. Up to you. But having said that, let's go ahead and look now at the 2500 rated game that I wanted to show you guys. All right, so here we go. This game was played back in 2007, actually at UTD, which is where I went to school. It was I think it was a grandmaster tournament there that was happening. That was during the time that I was in school there. But two 2500s, and we get the exact line that I showed you. So knight to d6, bishop goes back, and he goes for knight to c6. Now, the computer doesn't like that line, because if you're playing a computer, the computer is going to be able to defend perfectly as white, and it is slightly better for white. But from a human perspective, it's extremely tricky for white to play. So g6, like I mentioned, f5, queen to d5, queen to e7, defending here. Okay, and he's going for the allowing the rook to be taken. b6, bishop to b7. Okay, so this is pretty much exactly what I showed you. Now notice this player did play queen to f3, being aware that, hey, I don't want my queen to get trapped. I need to get it out of there at some point. And so he's playing queen f3 right away. He does decide to sacrifice the knight. And black says, you know what? I'm not going to take it right away. I don't have to. I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of my discovered attack here and make the queen move. And then I'll recapture the knight. All right, so c3 is played. The knight goes back. He opts to, a lot of times when you're down material, you don't want to trade too many pieces. Now, you could get away with that in this case. Actually, the engine says that's maybe the best thing to do, getting rid of that bishop. But from a practical standpoint, I like, the idea of keeping more pieces on the board. But white says, nope, I want to trade that knight regardless, and so it does get traded. All right. g5. And so there's a lot of ways you could play this. You could simply develop your bishop, try to get your rook into the game. You could try to hop this knight somewhere or move your queen around if you wanted. But this is just another example of, you could also just push your pawns. I mean, you have 3 pawns there, and he's going to try to use those to create threats, right? And so, okay, that's one way to do it. d4, and here we go, g4. He's just pushing that pawn all the way. There's a check, slides the king over. And notice black's king, even though we didn't castle, black's king is totally safe. Like, white doesn't have enough pieces anywhere near the king to create any kind of attack, right? So that's one thing that I do like about this line too. A lot of times I feel like my king is pretty safe as black, which is kind of counterintuitive. A lot of times if you lose castling rights, your king is not safe. In this case, I think it's different. Okay, so we get this capture. It gets really wild here, very tactical. Bishop to f3. Knight comes in. He doesn't want to take this because there was checkmate. I mean, I don't even know what's going on. There's a checkmate threat here. It is defended. Now he's blocking it with the bishop. Bishop to e4, which is the top engine move. And now it's equal. It's totally equal. So we had that crazy opening. And even though black is down the exchange, Stockfish says, nope, this is an equal position. White's king is not safe. Because of that, everything balances out. Engine is saying if you play knight to c4 here, that's the best move. Attacking this, bringing the knight forward makes sense. Also kind of unleashes the bishop, so I do like that. Bishop e7 was played in the game to hit the queen, and then queen to b5. And again, it's still an equal position. And so rook to d8. Knight to c4, really the engine was liking knight to c4. That move was not played in this game. And here, white sacrifices the rook for the 2 pieces. Okay. Bishop comes in, so there's the checkmate on e2. Very dangerous position for white, but knight to c1 also defended. Queen to d2 defends, but that allows f4, and now black is winning back the piece. He takes it. White can't get away with taking this because of the double attack here, and then the rook is going to be invading, so I'll just show you that. If white would have tried this, this would have happened, and then I think this is going to happen. Yep, looks really good for black. The pawns are starting to fall. So because of that, yeah, white just recaptured. And again, totally equal position. You can see the eval bar there, 3, 4, 5. Even though white has an extra pawn, his king is kind of not safe. Black has active pieces. And so we go from that crazy opening middle game to a relatively equal endgame. right? And they're just playing chess. And I don't want to bore you with this endgame. White did end up winning a pawn and went on to win in a pretty long endgame. So we're not really going to focus too much on this. White went on to win. But you could see the opening was very, exciting, interesting. Both players had chances to win the game. And I think it's a fantastic opening. Like, I really don't know why it's not played more often. So hopefully, after this video, you guys will be encouraged to try it. So if you're playing as black and you see this, you can go for knight takes e4. And if you're playing as white and somebody plays this on you, don't just take the pawn or take the knight, play queen h5 and go for the checkmate. Remember, bring your bishop back, and then they can choose. Black can choose if they want to go for the calm route or the the exciting complications. So hope you guys learned something and enjoyed that. I'll see you next time. As always, stay sharp, play smart, take care.